100% listener supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You're done tootin', Nighthawk. May you ever, forever rest in peace. This is the top of the second hour. If you missed the first hour, it's on YouTube and it's available on the archives. Do that. And our YouTube channel is Shiny Side Out with RR for Revolution Radio. You're back, needless to say, with Dave and Mecky on Shiny Side Out on Revolution Radio, the #1 listener supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for free. Get yourself some great merchandise from the station's website, a t-shirt, mug, or anything you like. It helps support the station because the station doesn't have any sponsors. So can you help? I hope you can. Do that. Now, Mecky and I also have our own merch. No one ever buys it. It's on Zazzle. Look for Shiny Side Out. And we have some merch, some co-branded merch. You could help me out because I've been unemployed for a little while, and every little bit helps. We have a Patreon as well. You'll find that in the bottom of the YouTube. So you're watching this on YouTube, copy and paste the link in and try to help out. And if you can't and it doesn't work or something's wrong with it, give us a message inside the video so we know which one you watched. Now, Mecky, did you know this is show number 659?
I do now, 950 and 600. As you educated me at the top of the other hour.
Yeah, well, I had it slated for this week from last week as being 659, so who knows. And we're talking about 9/11, 23 years on. I can barely cope with it being that far ago in time. So this is part 7, and there's 6 other parts. If you want to catch up, you can find them on our YouTube or the station's archives. So Mecky, do you want to give us a brief?
Look, we've been talking about the anomalies as they relate to the flights and the passengers in the last show. There are too many questions that are still remaining unanswered. And that's really the key reason why we still do this. Right? The questions are serious questions. They defy the laws of physics. The answers, the official answers, I should say, not the questions. So the questions are there. The official answers, unfortunately, aren't grounded in the physical reality that we all inhabit. So they're still in answering around various things, especially World Trade Center 7, WTC7. That's one of the biggest smoking guns of the entire affair. The planes, but then also the passengers. And the really odd thing that we found as we dug into it, some, not just us but others, is that just how many people didn't fly that day. It appears that more people didn't fly that were scheduled to fly than actually flew. Right? So it's you're turning up at the airport and half your plane isn't there. And I've never been in a situation, and I've flown a lot. I mean, I'm not saying it in the bragging sense. I'm saying in the sense I'm sick of it, right? I've flown a lot. And I've never been on a flight, any time, that was less than half full. Never. And I've flown different routes all over the place, other countries and times, etc., different airlines. And especially people, and this is the thing, I usually choose my seat. Right, before I fly, I go and choose my seat, and you can see how many seats are taken up, and there hasn't been a single instance when it wasn't almost full, the flight. You can still choose your seat, but then you can check again, the flight is full, okay, great. In this instance here, the flights were, I'm not saying they were full, but there were a lot more people there than actually showed up in the end. And that's just unusual, specifically for those flights. And some of the reasons people didn't fly are also odd. And so odd, in fact, that the FBI went to look for these people, as we discussed last time, right? And some of them they couldn't find, which is odd because you actually have to identify yourself significantly, with a lot of stuff before you can book a flight. You can't just book a flight as Joe Joe X from Unknownsville in the state of I don't know. So it doesn't work that way. You have to identify yourself when you book a ticket. When it's issued to you, there has to be, if it's an international flight, you must have some kind of passport to make the booking. And if it's a domestic flight, you still need ID to book that flight. And I'm sure in the States it's the same, right? Nonetheless, there we are. Can't find these people. So that's where we got up to in our last show, looking at all these people that didn't make it at all. Now, what we've also done, and this is important because the internet is not forever, and a lot of the resources that we used to put the initial show together some time ago are no longer available.
That's right.
But what we've compiled here is actually, to be honest with you, it's a pretty good research tool. If you're interested in putting together anything on 9/11, we've got 60 pages here with links and notes, as well as bibliographies, etc., that could help you do that. So I'm happy to make it available to anyone that wants it. But what we also have here is a complete timeline of the events leading up to 9/11 and then a bit after. Now, we're not going to go into all of it because that's 30 pages worth.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we should highlight. I think we should read all of the headlines, Dave, and then maybe the highlighted sections.
I'm just going to. I agree. I wanted to, from last week, I wanted to mention something.
Oh, the package handlers, yes.
Yeah, that's right. So Jesse Ventura, the MMA fighter, all the things that Jesse uses, yeah. He, on his show Conspiracy Theory, he interviewed a baggage handler who reported he was not to take the baggage from the plane, but he said, "You're putting the passengers into a blacked out bus. What about the luggage?" That's a really important thing to exclude when you want to see September 11 for what it was. If you just want to remember it with your cotton wool and your rose-colored glasses, understand what that means. I know there was a story about a suitcase that never made it onto the plane because there was apparently, like, one of the named people who were joining the flight, the luggage didn't make it onto the plane. Says, who was it? Says aviationpros.com. They said former federal terrorism investigators say a piece of luggage hastily checked in at the Portland, Maine airport by a World Trade Center hijacker on the morning of September 11 provided the Rosetta Stone, enabling FBI agents to swiftly unravel the mystery of who carried out suicide attacks and what motivated them. You could say that was, if you were conspiracy minded, a suitcase they put together after the plane had left, after the hijacking had occurred, after, according to this story, they could have assembled that evidence. Oh, it just never made it on the plane. Could. I'm not saying they did, just could. Because, I'm into questioning everything, and it's sad to think something would not be included in the story. I hope that makes sense to everyone. So, Ormond Brown. Now, you're saying that we don't just read Ormond Brown. Or we just read Ormond... Oh, Meckie's disappeared. He's muted
Sorry,
again.
no, Meckie's here. So, yes, we go Ormond Brown. You can read the whole thing, but once we finish with the names, there's the complete timeline, and I think we just read the title.
Cool, yeah, I get you.
But yeah, go ahead with Ormond Brown, my friend.
All right. It was similarly, apparently booked on Flight 175, but unaware of this. Brown told the FBI that on September 11, he in fact travelled on UA Flight 1689, that's a United Airlines flight, which left Boston at 8:05 a.m. for Denver, Colorado. He said he knew nothing about having been booked on United Airlines Flight 175, and that he did not change his reservation.
Curiouser and curiouser. Thomas Yandiorio was visiting the East Coast in September 2001 for his sister's graduation and was scheduled to return to California on Flight 175. But apparently his reservation was cancelled. Yandiorio explained to the FBI that when he checked in at the United States airline counter at the airport, he was informed that he was bumped from his flight to another UA flight that left at the same time as UA Flight 175. That flight, he said, had a stopover in Denver and arrived in LA about 20 minutes earlier than a Flight 175 would have. Yandiorio told the FBI that he had been wondering ever since September 11, 2001, why he was bumped for no reason at all. So again, was this someone taking pity on Thomas? Or did they really try to have as few people on these flights as possible? Because look, before we continue, I just need to put this in perspective. The reason we're harping on about the passengers is this. Okay? Are we being told the whole story? Did these planes, in fact, have the passengers on them at all? That the planes that flew into the buildings. Mm-hmm. Were there any people on there at all? Okay. And if no, then where are the people that were meant to have been on those flights? Now, if you had never intended for the people to be on those flights when they were flown into the buildings, etc., obviously assuming there was a larger hand at play here, then you have to deal with the passengers. You have to put them somewhere, right? And in my opinion, in my mind,
that's
the
if
less
they were real. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, the fewer passengers you have to deal with, the better. Obviously, because it's easier, right?
So
less people. Go on.
So in World War II, Meki, you know the story, the most infamous story about crashing a plane with a dead body already on it, with false papers and a satchel with a sealed envelope saying top secret, was crashed intentionally for people of the opposition in World War II to find, and then the government, it took them 4 months after they froze the person in a freezer who had already died, recreated a identity for them as being some kind of general with very important top secret plans, and were found by the enemy. And then the elaborate plan got better, where they called, for a prisoner exchange so they could receive that dead body with all of their paperwork intact. Though cleverly, they filled the envelope with misinformation, intentionally, to fool the enemy into thinking there was going to be an attack on the north side of France, up in the north, nearer to the North Sea rather than the Channel. Extraordinary. On a different date, so they would move all of their, munitions up there if they'd read the document. But of course, there was some delays, and they eventually got the prisoner exchange done, and they forensically identified the envelope had been opened and had been read, and then their intelligence said that they'd planned for this event to occur. And it was glorious, right? That was using some poor chap's corpse in this elaborate plan. If people were booked onto this flight to fill it up, remember, from last week's show, people just seemed to be thrown a copy of themselves on there. Could it ever have been a similar scenario to what I've just said? Let the AI work out what I just said. So I have to question it. I can't help myself. Is it at all possible? I'm not saying it's true, just is it possible? Sure. I come to the conclusion
answer is, of
that
course,
it could be, yeah.
It's possible. Of course,
That's right.
right. Which, of course, opens a whole other can of worms, right, at that point.
Uh-huh.
And once you walk down that rabbit hole, which you're welcome to do, of course, you'll soon find that you find yourself in deep water, and not too many people are comfortable in those kind of circumstances. So the question is, how much do you want to question? That's the question. How much do you want to believe? And as Dave said, you can just pack yourself in wool and not worry about anything else here. But why don't you tell us about Mr. Bruce Boudreau?
Boudreau and Bobby J. Both of them head coach of the American Hockey League team, the Manchester Monarchs, and the assistant coach, Bobby J, were booked on Flight 175 so they could get to Los Angeles for the start of the Los Angeles Kings training camp. The Manchester Monarchs are the Los Angeles Kings, American Hockey League affiliate. But Andy Murray, head coach of the Los Angeles Kings, scheduled a pre-camp meeting and dinner with all the coaches in the organization for the night of the September 10th, the day before. Therefore, about 5 days before 9/11, John Wolfe, the Kings assistant to the general manager, switched Boudreau and Jay to fly on September 10th so they could attend.
William Fong, and he's our last passenger here that we are going to look at. CEO of Li & Fung, the world's largest sourcing company, was booked on Flight 175, but at the last minute changed his plans and boarded a plane bound for San Francisco instead. The reason, according to Fortune magazine, was he had woken up on the morning of September 11th with an inexplicable urge to meet his sister, who lives in San Francisco, for lunch at their favorite sushi restaurant there. This sushi craving saved his life, Fortune magazine commented. The source, of course, for this is Fortune magazine. So, yeah, interesting. I mean, different circumstances prevented people from boarding the plane, and some people that had been booked onto the plane didn't know they had been booked onto the plane at all, which I find this is probably the most curious of this. So two things I find curious. One is there were people that were booked on the flight and had no idea they were booked on the flight.
Yep.
That's one. The other one is people that were booked on the flight but can now no longer be traced, don't seem to exist. Those are two facts I find exceedingly curious.
Let alone any clairvoyance that people might have experienced.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
a sudden change of mind. So there was, I think, 2 from last week that were obvious, that they'd had a premonition, or others who just, like the French guy from the UFO movie Third Kind, where he goes, people just, they don't even know why they're here. I mean, they received an invitation, right? But they're here. So, the complete 9/11 timeline. I'll start. 1991 to 1997. Oil investment in Central Asia follows Soviet collapse. The Soviet Union collapses in 1991, creating several new nations in Central Asia. Major US oil companies, including ExxonMobil, Texaco, Unocal, BP, Amoco, Shell, Enron, directly invest billions in these Central Asian nations, bribing heads of state to secure equity rights in the huge oil reserves in these regions. The oil companies commit to $35 billion in future direct investments in Kazakhstan. It is believed at the time that these oil fields will have an estimated $6 trillion potential value. Becky.
That's not peanuts. In November 1993, the Enron power plant creates demand for an Afghanistan pipeline. This is actually very important. The Dabhol power plant, and source for this is Enron. The Indian government approves construction of Enron's Dabhol power plant located near Mumbai, or Bombay, on the west coast of India. Enron has invested $3 billion, the largest single foreign investment in India's history. Enron owns 65% of the Dabhol liquefied natural gas power plant, intended to provide 1/5 of India's energy needs by 1997. And the source for this is Indian Express, Asia Times, as well as the New York Times for this piece.
And thanks, Mitchell Bub. Yes, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. One of my favourite movies. I should have known. 1994 to 1997, US supports Taliban rise to power. People forget this, right? Between 1994 and 1996, the US supported the Taliban politically through its allies Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, essentially because Washington viewed the Taliban as anti-Iranian, anti-Shia, and pro-Western. Between 1995 and 1997, US support was even more driven because of its backing for the Unicol pipeline project. He notes that many US diplomats saw them as messianic do-gooders, like born-again Christians from the American Bible Belt. That's Dravis 2005, pages 326. There is evidence the CIA may have helped supply the Taliban with weapons during the first months of their rise to power. And that comes from the Times of India.
Yep. September to October 1995, the Unicol obtains Turkmenistan pipeline deal. Oil company Unicol signs an $8 billion deal with Turkmenistan to construct 2 pipelines, one for oil and one for gas, as part of a larger plan for 2 pipelines intended to transport oil and gas from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan and then, of course, into Pakistan. Before proceeding further, however, Unicol needs to execute agreements with Pakistan and Afghanistan. Pakistan and Ahmed Shah Massoud's government in Afghanistan, however, have already signed a pipeline deal with an Argentinian company. Okay, now Henry Kissinger went in there and at the dinner said that he hopes that that experience will win the day. Unicol will later open an office in Kabul weeks after the Taliban capture of the capital in late 1996, and will interact with the Taliban seeking support for its pipeline until at least December 1997.
So December 1995, Caspian Sea said to contain 2/3 of world's known oil reserves. Well, there's a target if I've ever seen one. The American Petroleum Institute asserts that the states bordering the Caspian Sea, north of Afghanistan, contain 2/3 of the world's known reserves, or 659 billion barrels. Such numbers spur demand for an Afghan pipeline. Bring that on. However, by April 1997, estimates dropped to 179 billion barrels.
Still nothing to sneeze at. Yeah. 1996 to September 11, 2001. So these are ongoing negotiations for the next 5 years. Enron gives Taliban millions in bribes in effort to get the Afghan pipeline built. So this is, this goes on for years. The Associated Press will later report that the Enron Corporation bribes Taliban officials as part of a no-holds-barred bid to strike a deal for an energy pipeline in Afghanistan. Atul Davda, a senior director for Enron's international division, will later claim Enron had intimate contact with Taliban officials. Presumably, this effort began around 1996 when a power plant Enron was building in India ran into trouble, and Enron began an attempt to supply with natural gas via a planned pipeline through Afghanistan. It is alleged Enron secretly employs CIA agents to carry out its dealings overseas. According to CIA source, Enron proposed to pay the Taliban large sums of money in a tax on every cubic foot of gas and oil shipped through a pipeline they planned to build. This source claims Enron paid more than $400 million for a feasibility study on the pipeline, and a large portion of that cost was payoffs to the Taliban. An investigation after Enron's collapse in 2001 will determine that some of this payoff money ended up funding Al-Qaeda. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
That's from the Associated Press.
Pardon me. So, May 1996, US seeks stability in Afghanistan for Unicol pipeline. Now, Robin Raffel, Deputy Secretary of State for South Asia, speaks to the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister about Afghanistan. She says that the US government now hopes that peace in the region will facilitate US business interests, such as the proposed Unicol gas pipeline from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan to Pakistan.
Yes, sir. June 24, 1996, Uzbekistan cuts deal with Enron. Uzbekistan signs a deal with Enron that could lead to joint development of the Central Asian nations' potentially rich natural gas fields. And that's the Houston Chronicle. We get this from.
Sorry, just having coughing fits here, don't worry about me. August 13, 1996, Unicol Delta Oil plan Afghan pipeline. Unicol and Delta Oil of Saudi Arabia reach agreement with state companies in Turkmenistan and Russia to build a natural gas pipeline from Turkmenistan to Pakistan via Afghanistan. I sound like RFK. The agreement is finalized in 1997.
I'm just going to share the headline and give you a bit of background. After September 1996, a journalist investigates and sees the US and Taliban combating Russia over Central Asian pipeline issues. So there's power play, of course, starting out in the Central Asian republics as to who will ultimately be able to both, extract the oil and gas, and then also where and how the pipelines will be built to transport that wealth out of the region.
Yeah. September 27th, 1996, victorious Taliban supported by Pakistan, viewed by US Unicol as stabilizing force. Taliban forces conquering Afghanistan. The oil company Unicol is hopeful that the Taliban will stabilize Afghanistan and allow its pipeline plans to go forward. According to some reports, preliminary agreement on the pipeline was reached between the Taliban and Unicol long before the fall of Kabul. That featured in the Daily Telegraph and also the 9/11 Commission.
It's funny how the Taliban was seen as a stabilizing influence, I think, because they were in bed, of course, with the West at the time, and then it was the same Taliban that rushed to take control after Biden so quickly left Afghanistan in shambles.
I can't wait till this coming up. I know what's happening next. So
I'll tell you. October 7th, 1996. Future Bush envoy to Afghanistan wants US to help Taliban unify country and build a pipeline. In a Washington Post op-ed, Zalmay Khalilzad calls on the US to deal with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Quote, "It is time for the United States to re-engage the Taliban, does not practice the anti-US style of fundamentalism practiced by Iran. It is closer to the Saudi model."
That's funny.
Oh, God. He calls on the US to help the Taliban put Afghanistan on a path toward peace, noting that continuing violence has been a source of regional instability and an obstacle to building pipelines to bring Central Asian oil and gas to Pakistan, and, of course, most importantly, the world markets. Washington Post from July 10, 1996.
Oh, that was a successful cough. October 11th, 1996, Afghan pipeline key to one of the great prizes of the 21st century. The Daily Telegraph publishes an interesting article about pipeline politics in Afghanistan. Quote, "Behind the tribal clashes that have scarred Afghanistan lies one of the great prizes of the 21st century, the fabulous energy reserves of Central Asia. The deposits are huge," said a diplomat from the region. "Kazakhstan alone may have more oil than Saudi Arabia. Turkmenistan is already known to have the 5th largest gas reserves in the world." Daily Telegraph, 1996.
In the world. August of 1997. The CIA monitors Central Asia for oil reserves. The CIA creates a secret task force to monitor Central Asia's politics and gauge its wealth. Covert CIA officers, some well-trained petroleum engineers, travel through southern Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan to sniff out potential oil reserves. That's Time magazine, from the 5th of April, 1998.
All right, for this next one, I'm going to remind whoever's in charge of my CIA handler that I'm reading a story that was published. I love the leader, I love the AI and all the military-industrial complexes of the world. I do. October 27th, 1997, Halliburton announces Turkmenistan project. Unocal and Delta Oil form consortium. Halliburton, a company headed by future Vice President Dick Cheney, announces a new agreement to provide technical services and drilling for Turkmenistan. The press release mentions, quote, "Halliburton has been providing a variety of services in Turkmenistan for the past 5 years," unquote. On the same day, a consortium to build a pipeline through Afghanistan is formed. It is called CENTGAS. And the two main partners are Unocal and Delta Oil of Saudi Arabia. This is both from Halliburton in 97 and CENTGAS in 97 as announcements.
November 1997. Enron and the Bin Laden family team up for a project.
December 1997, Unocal establishes pipeline training facility near Bin Laden's compound. I wonder how they found out where he lived. Anyway, Unocal pays University of Nebraska $900,000 to set up a training facility near Osama bin Laden's Kandahar compound to train 400 Afghan teachers, electricians, carpenters, and pipe fitters in anticipation of using them for their pipeline in Afghanistan. Unocal is paying University of Nebraska's Professor Thomas Gutierrez to develop the training program. Gutierrez travels to Afghanistan and meets with Taliban leaders, and also arranges for some Taliban leaders to visit the US around this time. That's around as December 1997. Daily Telegraph, blah, blah, blah. So, it will later be revealed that the CIA paid Gutierrez, probably pronouncing it, mispronouncing it, to head a program at the University of Nebraska that created textbooks for Afghanistan promoting violence and jihad.
That's gold. December 4th, 1997. Taliban representatives visit Unocal in Texas.
This is the one that I like the most.
Taliban representatives in Texas, 1997. Source Lionsgate. Representatives of the Taliban are invited guests to the Texas headquarters of Unocal to negotiate their support for the pipeline. Future President George W. Bush is governor of Texas at the time. The Taliban appear to agree to a $2 billion pipeline deal, but will do the deal only if the U.S. officially recognizes the Taliban regime. The Taliban meet with U.S. officials. It has been claimed that the Taliban meet with Enron officials while in Texas. Enron, headquartered in Texas, has a large financial interest in the pipeline at the time. The Taliban also visited Thomas Gautier, which we just heard of, an academic at the University of Nebraska who's a consultant for Unicall and also has been paid by the CIA for his work in Afghanistan. Gautier takes them on a visit to Mount Rushmore. And the source for this is the BBC, Daily Telegraph, Dreyfus, and, like I said, Lionsgate.
So, the magical part of that whole thing was the creation of false passports by the CIA to be able to allow them to fly into the US. It's hilarious. So 10:35, this is very specific, to 10:39 a.m., August 7th, 1998, Al-Qaeda bombs US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing over 200. Bombings of the Nairobi, Kenya US embassy and the Dar es Salaam, Tanzania US embassy. 2 US embassies in Africa are bombed within minutes of each other. That would seem coordinated, I suppose. In the 2002 book, The Cell, reporters John Miller, Michael Stone, and Chris Miller will write, quote, "What has become clear with time is the facets of the East Africa plot had been known beforehand to the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, and to Israel and Kenyan intelligence services. No one can seriously argue that the horrors of August 7th, 1998 couldn't have been prevented," unquote. They will also comment, quote, "Inexplicable as the intelligence failure was, more baffling still was that Al-Qaeda correctly presumed that a major attack could be carried out by a cell that US agents had already uncovered," unquote. Miller, Stone and Mitchell, 2002, pp. pages 195, 206.
That's amazing, isn't it? It's
Sure.
like, no, really though, I mean, the more you research this stuff, the more you look into it, the more you realize, none of this had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
None of this was necessary. All these deaths were completely avoidable. Yeah. Anyway. August 9, 1998. Northern Alliance stronghold conquered by Taliban. Pipeline project now looks promising. The Northern Alliance capital of Afghanistan, Mazar-e-Sharif, is conquered by the Taliban. This victory gives the Taliban control of 90% of Afghanistan, including the entire proposed pipeline route. Sandgas, the consortium behind the gas pipeline, would run through Afghanistan. That would run through Afghanistan. Is now ready to proceed. Its main partners are the American oil firm Unicall and Delta Oil of Saudi Arabia, plus Hyundai of South Korea, 2 Japanese companies, a Pakistani conglomerate, and the Turkmen government. That's from the Daily Telegraph, August 13, 1998.
Well, one week later, August 20th, 1998, US fires on Al-Qaeda Afghanistan training camps, Sudanese facility. The US fires 66 missiles at 6 Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan and 13 missiles at a pharmaceutical factory in Khartoum, Sudan, in retaliation for the US embassy bombings. The Sudanese Al-Shifa factory is hit in the middle of the night when it is unoccupied. Intelligence will later suggest that the factory had no links to bin Laden. President Clinton is soon widely accused of using the missile strike to distract the US public from a personal sex scandal.
August 22nd, 1998. Mullah Omar calls the State Department, expresses interest in confidential dialogue. State Department official Michael Malinowski, 2 days after the US missile strikes on militant training camps in Afghanistan, top Taliban leader Mullah Omar unexpectedly telephones the State Department in Washington. So he clearly had their number, right? He talks to Michael Malinowski, Office Director for Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh in the Bureau of South Asian Affairs. Although Mullah Omar does not threaten the US, he suggests that the missile strikes could spark more terrorist attacks. He says the Taliban is open to the idea of establishing a secure communication channel with US officials, possibly through the US embassy in Pakistan. There is no embassy in Afghanistan. The State Department comments Omar's contact with US officials rather on his reclusive nature and his past avoidance of contact with all things American. The US then sends the Taliban some evidence of bin Laden's militant activities, but it appears the secure communications channel never materializes. This is from the State Department themselves as a source.
Okay. Well, still, this is now we've moved on to October. So October 1998, military analyst finds sensitive information on terrorism in Afghanistan, but US authorities confiscate the data. Julie Sears, a military analyst for the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, travels to Afghanistan. She sees a terrorist training center in Taliban-controlled territory. Sears will later claim the Taliban's brutal regime was being kept in power significantly by bin Laden's money, plus the narcotics trade, while Massoud's resistance was surviving on a shoestring. With even a little aid to the Afghan resistance, we could have pushed the Taliban out of power. But there was great reluctance by the State Department and the CIA to undertake that. She partly blames the interest of the US government and the oil company Unocal to see the Taliban achieve political stability to enable Trans-Afghanistan pipeline. This is directly from Julie. That's the source. I'm going to believe Meki's going to continue to talk in a minute.
Oh, okay. Do you want to read this one?
What?
She claims.
Yes.
She claims.
Yeah, no, you can.
No, that's the part of the text, right? She claims.
I've lost the text. It's disappeared on me.
Oh, okay, no worries. I think we are. She claims Massoud told me he had proof of that Unocal had provided money that helped the Taliban take Kabul. She also states the State Department didn't want to have anything to do with Afghan resistance or even politically to reveal that there was any viable option for the Taliban. After 2 weeks, Sears returns with a treasure trove of maps, photographs, and interviews. That's from ABC News as well as the New York Observer. So this is mid-1996, 2002, October 2001 as well. And when Sears returns from Afghanistan, her material is confiscated and she is accused of being a spy. Says one senior colleague, she had gotten the proper clearances to go and she came back with valuable information. But high-level officials were so intent of getting rid of her, the last thing they wanted to pay attention to was any information she had. Sears is cleared of wrongdoing, but her security clearance is pulled. She eventually quits the DIA in frustration in 1999. ABC News and New York Observer, which actually is, this kind of lines up with Susan Landauer's testimony.
Yes.
The last bit of this article here is Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, Republican California, will claim that the main DIA official behind the punishment of Sears is Lieutenant General Patrick Hughes, who later becomes one of the top officials running the Department of Homeland Security.
Oh, and I love that leader as well. December 5th, 1998, Unocal abandons Afghan pipeline project. Unocal announces it is withdrawing from the CENTGAS pipeline consortium and closing 3 of its 4 offices in Central Asia. President Clinton, Freudian slip, refuses to extend diplomatic recognition to the Taliban, making business there legally problematic. This comes from the New York Times in 1998.
I think I prefer Clinton. Anyway, in late 1998...
I can't be held liable if I mispronounced his name.
Colonel Clint.
Colonel Clint.
I know nothing. Sorry. Late 1998, Taliban stall pipeline negotiations to keep Western powers at bay.
In 1999, US ready to fight for oil, especially in Persian Gulf and Caspian regions. A top-level US policy document explicitly confirms the US's military's readiness to fight a war for oil. The report, Strategic Assessment 1999, prepared for the US Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense, states, quote, energy and resource issues will continue to shape international security, unquote. And if an oil problem arises, quote, US forces might be used to ensure adequate supplies, unquote. Oil conflicts over production facilities and transport routes, particularly in the Persian Gulf and Caspian regions, are specifically envisaged. Sydney Morning Herald, 2003.
In June of 1999, Enron plans to build a power plant with the Bin Laden family.
Familia. See.
And that was in the Gaza Strip, believe it or not.
Oh my goodness, yes.
I know. What?
I know, right? And then,
That's not
and
right.
then Enron had a whoopsie doodle.
And the whoopsie. Yes, like, oh,
That's what my daughter says. Whoopsie doodles.
we're completely fraudulent.
Yeah.
Kind of whoopsie. What? Who said
With
that?
a single gunshot in the driveway. July, August 1999. Taliban leaders visit the US. About a dozen Afghan leaders visit the US. They are militia commanders, mostly Taliban, and some with ties to Al-Qaeda. A few are opponents of the Taliban. Their exact names and titles remain classified. For 5 weeks, they visit numerous locales in the US, including Mount Rushmore. All their expenses are paid by the US government and the University of Nebraska. Thomas Gautier, an academic heading an Afghanistan program at the University of Nebraska, hosts their visit. Gautier is working as a consultant to Unicol at the time, and some Taliban visits to the US are paid for by Unicol, such as a visit 2 years earlier and you can look at refer to December 4th of 1997. And that comes from the Chicago Tribune, by the way.
July
2000.
4th, 1999, executive order issued against Taliban. With the chances of a pipeline deal with the Taliban looking increasingly unlikely. Now this is the linchpin here, right?
Mm-hmm.
President Clinton finally issues an executive order prohibiting commercial transactions with the Taliban, and that comes from the CNN on I think it's July 6th, 1999, as well as of course from the president July 12th of 1999.
December 20th, 1999, Iran said to be supporting conflict in Afghanistan to further their own pipeline plans. So you can see who's moved in. The BBC explains one reason why the Northern Alliance has been able to hold out for so long in its civil war against the Taliban in Afghanistan. Quote, Iran has stirred up the fighting in order to make sure an international oil pipeline goes through its territory and not through Afghanistan. This comes from the BBC in 1999.
Basically. October 12, 2000, USS Cole is bombed by Al-Qaeda. We all remember this, I think. I mean, I do remember this.
Mm-hmm.
The USS Cole is bombed in the Gulf of Aden, in Yemen harbor, by 2 Al-Qaeda militants, Hassan al-Kamri and Ibrahim al-Thawar, aka Nibras. 17 US soldiers are killed and 30 are wounded. The CIA will later conclude that with just slightly more skilled execution, the attack could have killed 300 and sunk the ship. And that comes, in fact, largely from the 9/11 Commission, from The Guardian, various other Los Angeles Times, and other documents.
Everywhere.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
everywhere.
So, widely known. December 19th, 2000, US seeks Taliban overthrow. Considers Russia-US invasion of Afghanistan. The Washington Post reports the United States has quietly begun to align itself with those in the Russian government calling for a military action against Afghanistan, and has toyed with the idea of a new raid to wipe out Osama bin Laden. Until it backed off under local pressure, it went so far as to explore whether a Central Asian country would permit the use of its territory for such a purpose. It appears that all pre-9/11 plans to invade Afghanistan involve attacking from the north with Russia.
Interesting, isn't it?
Washington Post, 2000.
Fascinating. January 21, 2001. Oh, it's getting close. Bush administration takes over many oil industry connections. George W. Bush is inaugurated as the 43rd U.S. president, replacing Bill Clinton. The only cabinet-level figure to remain permanently in office is CIA Director Tenet, appointed in 1997 and reputedly a longtime friend of George H.W. Bush. Numerous figures in Bush's administration have been directly employed in the oil industry, including Bush, Vice President Cheney, and National Security Advisor Rice. Rice had been on Chevron's board of directors since 1991 and even had a Chevron oil tanker named after her. It is later revealed that Cheney is still being paid up to $1 million a year in deferred payments from Halliburton, the oil company he headed. Enron's ties also reach deep into the administration. I don't know if that is actually legal. I don't know if Cheney...
Sorry, what?
I mean, this is a conflict.
I couldn't hear what you
it's
said.
a conflict of... This is from Salon, Guardian, and the Washington Post. Yeah, yes. What? Can't hear anything you're saying, Mackie. You're breaking up. Thanks, brother. Appreciate the support.
What? Who?
What?
I think it was across the
Prank
line.
call. Who's this?
Prank
I don't know
call.
this person.
Yeah, it's your fridge running. I go and I chase after it. Look, I would happily receive $1 million a year from Halliburton for something. At the moment, I clean cars in the car park. I don't really care. Late February 2001, Enron influences Cheney's energy task force to help troubled DeBoer plant. Vice President Cheney is holding a series of secret energy task force meetings to determine the Bush administration's future energy policy. Starting at this time, Enron leader Ken Lay and other Enron officials take part in at least half a dozen of these secret meetings. After one such meeting, Cheney's Energy Task Force changes a draft energy proposal to include a provision boosting oil and natural gas production in India. Washington Post, 2002.
You see, Dave, whenever I see these things, sorry, I know. And look, we're not going to go. We're not going to be able to get through it all, and it's not possible. But so let me just say this: we are always thinking that these CEOs and general C-level executives are, smart and capable and whatnot. And let me just tell you one thing here. That's a no. Okay, they're not.
Yeah.
Okay, they are, if anything, probably less desirable human beings than you yourself are. And I don't know you, Mr. Dear Listener, Mr. and Mrs. Listener, but these are not good people. Okay, people that make it to that level of power in any power structure, and I'm not hating on CEOs here, I'm talking about any power structure, they're usually the kind of people that you don't want to know. Okay, they're not good people, full stop. I have no time for them. They're all parasites as far as I'm concerned. And you're looking at Ken Lay. I mean, Enron is probably a masterclass in what capitalism can actually do or get up to. And if you don't know, they sold imagined futures that didn't exist. Literally.
Oh, that's
literally.
futures for you.
It was incredible. That's the music, buddy.
This has been yet another Shiny Side Out with David Mackey. Coming up next, it'll be an awesome show, no doubt. Just listen in, join in, and if you can, like, share, subscribe, and comment on this video and tell us what you disagree with or what you agree with. And we'll see you next week for Tuesday morning, Thursday morning, 7 a.m. Eastern for Plato's Cave. And in the meantime, Mickey,
Be safe!